this project now is at the highest level in the Russian bureaucracy in terms of at prime minister level, and it's probably going to be adopted by Russia in 2024 during their during their presidency of the BRICS, and it's a de-dollarizing mechanism. That's all I can say to all of you at the moment. And this is going to be huge, enormous. And we're going to have news about that as soon as, let's say, the Prime Minister of Russia approves it definitively. Vladimir Putin, of course, will have to approve it as well. And this is going to be part of Russian policy for the year 2024, and will be incorporated into BRICS, and will be discussed by BRICS 10, right? And will be discussed before their summit in Kazan in October next year, where we're going to probably have BRICS 14, 15, or 16. Argentina, nobody cares about it anymore. People are already thinking about, okay, who are the next ones? And there's an enormous list of over 30 nations, including, for instance, Algeria, which is practically certain, Kazakhstan, Turkey, Nigeria. These are very serious candidates for BRICS 14, 15, 16, 17. Everybody wants to get in, essentially. The Turks, for instance, they have been, according to people in Moscow, the Turks have been approaching seriously because they want to be part of BRICS as much as they want to be part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So expect imperial reactions if this happens, because they're going to be extremely furious with all that, right? So this was the Russian chapter, more or less. And for instance, wonderful news, for instance, you have younger people in St. Petersburg discussing how to set up think tanks. Russia needs badly geopolitical and geoeconomic think tanks. So we see the new generation heavily invested on it as well. And then I switched to Kazakhstan, and I landed basically in a sea controlled by Atlanticists. It was absolutely outstanding because I went to the Astana club, which I had been before, which is basically, essentially is an Atlanticist club that meets every year in Astana. This was organized during the old Nazarbayev day, not so old, in fact, by the Nazarbayev people, which are extremely competent, by the way. They work at the Nazarbayev Foundation. But it's not exactly the way the Tokayev group sees relations, foreign relations. So you can feel that there is a tension between both groups. So our discussion was, let's say, organized by the Nazarbayev group, and obviously there were a lot of Atlanticists and not many representatives. So basically Global South, very, very few people. And of course, Eurasianists, even less. So in the end, as, let's say, more or less independents, we had two Chinese, very, very high level analysts. One, the great legendary Russian journalist Vladimir Posner, he's going to be 90 next year. He lived in the US for a long time. He was the host of a very, very popular geopolitical show on Russian TV for 15 years at least. A Russian economist, a Turkish analyst who works at Brookings in DC, and myself. And everybody else was a sea of Atlanticists. So it was very civil. It was extremely interesting to, of course, discuss, debate, have dinner together with all these people. But you could feel that the tension would explode at any minute. And it did at the last plenary session. Nazarbayev was there. Nazarbayev started the plenary session the last day. We had an overall discussion which included Ukraine more in depth than before. And then, of course, it was inevitable. So on one side of the table, basically, we had two Russians and myself, and on the other side, that horde of Atlanticists. I tell a little bit of the story without naming names, of course. in one of my latest columns, exactly. That column was for Sputnik International. And they liked it. The organizers liked it because there was a real debate. And uh, once again, it confirmed what the Russians have been telling us for quite a while. It's practically impossible to have a dialogue. Practically impossible. Vladimir Posner, for that matter, was disrespected live by one of these Atlanticists. And I had to intervene and put this guy in his place in front of everybody. And in the end, of course, some people would not talk to me, and some people would approach me and say, "You did the right thing," because this is going to be on the records, you know. But when these people they cannot even exercise good manners, and you know how these Zyocons and Atlanticist Zyocons are. They're not very polite. They're not very well educated. They're very blunt. They're very aggressive. And the guys thought it was normal to insult a 90-year-old in the middle of a round table. Come on. These are the basics, right? And he didn't even have arguments, of course. Of course, on the other side, we had Institute of Strategic Studies in London, Atlantic Council, etc. At least they tried some arguments, the same old bullshit that we already know. But overall, it was a very, very interesting experience because it confronts us once again to the fact that it's quite impossible to have a real dialogue at the highest level. Exactly what Russia's diplomats have been saying, and very, very important, the conversations that I had on the sidelines with Zhou Bo from Tsinghua University. This guy is probably one of the top 3 Chinese analysts, fluent in English.
I've tried to get him on, yes.
You tried to get him on.
Former People's Liberation Army.
Let me help you. Let's try him. Let's try him to come to your show. We tried together. And so Bo is amazing live. Yeah, we had wonderful conversations. And he basically said the same thing. And he goes to the West a lot. And he says, yes, with diplomats, with think tanks, it's possible to have some conversation. With people who exercise policy, it's absolutely out of the question. And now they are absolutely obsessed with the demonization of China. So I don't even start these conversations. You know? So it was good to hear from, of course, from this Turkish guy at Brookings, the same thing. He works in the US, he lives in the US, but he understands Eurasia very, very well. And let's say he is a Kemalist, but he's also an Eurasianist at the same time. Very, very interesting character. So, but it's good for us independents to go to these places, not all the time, of course, but just to reaffirm what we already know. In fact, we try dialogue. In fact, when you're not talking about politics, if you are at a dinner talking about food or art, etc., everything is very civil. Once you start talking about politics, it derails completely. And then to finish it off, I went to the old Silk Roads. I went to southern Kazakhstan, to Shymkent, Otrar, and Turkestan especially, which was in the latest summit of the Organization of Turkic States, was proclaimed to be the spiritual capital of Turkic peoples. So part of my Silk Road research, I went there, it was absolutely outstanding. I saw a shrine that I wanted to see for years, dedicated to a Sufi saint, Khoja Ahmed Yasawi, who is considered the most important Sufi character in all those heartland regions, right? And I ended in Almaty in a disco at 3 a.m. with the Kazakh mafia. So that was the end of the story.
Talk about Pepe. If you could remind our audience the importance of Kazakhstan, Central Asia to. There's this struggle going on, and you seem to be right in the middle of it. You have on the one side Russia, China getting much closer to these countries, building their integration projects through them in collaboration, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. And then you also have, as you mentioned, at the Astana Club, you have NATO Stan also vying for control. Could you talk about that? And
yes.
where
That's a
things
very
are
good
with it.
question. Very good question, Danny, because Kazakhstan is right in the middle of these ramifications of the Great Game, right? They are a partner of Russia at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and at the Eurasia Economic Union. This means that all these discussions on de-dollarization, which are very advanced at the Eurasia Economic Union, conducted by Sergei Glaziev, which I met this year, in fact, at least twice, and his team as well, which I keep talking to every time that I go to Moscow. And these decisions will merge into BRICS, the de-dollarization process. So if Kazakhstan, which is on the list to become a BRICS member this year, gets in, they're going to have to be very straightforward. And they have to, I would say, control a little bit more the Atlanticist influence, which is very, very prominent still. There's a lot of course, American interest, oil and gas, etc. European, Eni from Italy, Total from France, etc. There's a lot of investment in Kazakhstan as well. The connections in the Nazarbayev camp, as we mentioned, are basically Atlanticist, most of them. Tokayev is it's closer to China. His relation to Russia is extremely ambiguous. It was very, very hard to get from Kazakhs, and I asked all the Kazakhs that I could, and I never got a straight answer on, okay, what's really going on here between these two clans? Is there too much tension? Who's controlling what ministry here? They would be extremely polite but evasive. They prefer not. I perfectly understand, because it's very, very tense. In fact, they still have not digested the color revolution at the beginning of last year, when they were saved by Russia in 48 hours. So Tokayev owns his administration now directly to the Russians. Everybody knows that. At the same time, a nugget of information, for instance, one of our Kazakh interlocutors told us that on a popular level, public opinion level, there's a lot of mistrust of Russia by Kazakhs. North of Kazakhstan, there's a Russophile and Russophone population. But the rest of Kazakhstan, of course, Kazakhs, descendants from Turkic clans and tribes, etc., they mistrust the Russians a lot. And with China, it's let's say mixed feelings. There's a lot of Chinese investment, for instance, in Astana and Almaty, especially Almaty business center, right? So the relationship in several different levels with both Russia and China is, let's say, a bit wobbly. On the other hand, the relationship with the Americas from at least one of the clans is very solid. So, on a very, very different register, it gives you the impression that Kazakhstan is hedging their bets. Of course, they cannot hedge because they are at the center of Eurasia. They are a close partner of both Russia and China in multilateral organizations, in investment, in the case of China, pipelines. So they have to be extremely careful. But there is, I would say, a sort of ghost war in the background, which for us foreigners is almost impossible to get to the real nitty-gritty. But I'll keep going back, of course. And I discussed this with some other guests and they said, well, we are all extremely interested about Kazakhstan, so we'll keep coming back every year and try to learn a little bit more. Now the forum is going to be held every year. It stopped because of COVID, right? And what was interesting is to travel inside Afghanistan. The impression that you have, for instance, when you are in Almaty, which is a business city, very pragmatic, It's very different from Astana, the seat of power in the middle of the steppes, right? And when you go to the south to these pilgrimage sites like Turkestan, the perspective is Sufi. It's even more interesting. It's Sufi Islam, it's more philosophical. People don't care too much about politics. They're basically thinking about their well-being now that they're becoming, let's say, a mid-level to high-level income country. It's a superpower in the making, Kazakhstan, and it's developing very fast. When you arrive in a place like Turkestan, which for most people is okay, it's in the middle of nowhere, you have a ultra modern city, a new airport, buildings built by Turkish construction companies everywhere, an excellent university, at least 3 of them that I saw, a fabulous library, the Al-Farabi library, under the name, of course, of the great philosopher, logician, mathematician, music theorist. Al-Farabi was a humanist before humanism, in fact. And the library is outstanding. I was going there every day. Fantastic. Many European capitals don't have a library so sophisticated. So it's fascinating to see all these contrasts. Of course, it's fascinating. But it's a very complex country, and Danny. And obviously, very few people in the West know how it works.
Yeah, that's that is true. I mean, there's been so many developments in this region that point to the struggle that you're talking about, and the struggle for development. I mean, these are countries that lost a lot after the fall of the Soviet Union and have had to climb out of that and redevelop relations. In the U.S., I mean, there's a reason why the so-called Uyghur opposition calls their state the East Turkestan movements, because they're trying to exploit, I think, this idea that this whole region is basically the property of the United States and the West. And so that's a delicate place to be in. So it's very interesting.
But but when you start to get deeper into ramifications of original peoples, original tribes, original clans in all across the heartland. For instance, the people who lived in parts of Kazakhstan today, 2,500 years ago, they were Scythians. In fact, the Turks came much, much later, Turkic peoples who came from the Altai Mountains. And then you have a miscegenation of different groups like Sakas. Sakas, they were Scythians from the east, for instance. And when you look at the way the Kazakhs understand their national character, in their minds, they are descendants of the Sakas. So basically, they are descendants of the Scythians as well. It's absolutely fascinating, And the Turkic peoples came much, much later. But now parts of Kazakhstan, they are basically rescuing their Turkic heritage, like Turkestan, for instance. And even in Astana, there's a room in the National Museum, which is a fantastic museum, by the way. They have an enormous map in a room, which is the map of Turkic peoples. So then you see different tribes and clans since at least 600, 500 before Christ, from Azerbaijan to Eastern Turkestan, which is where the Uyghurs live, because the Uyghurs are Turkic people as well. But when you talk to Kazakhs about that, they don't politicize the Uyghur issue like the Americans do, for political reasons, right? No, they are a Turkic people, they're over there, but now they live under China. Okay, this is a Chinese matter. We're not going to interfere, which is something interesting when you are in their neighbors. Kyrgyzstan, there are a lot of Uyghurs that live in Kyrgyzstan, and they do the back and forth across the border. It's very, very close. So when I was there the last time, I was talking to these guys, and they said, look, we don't have any problems with the Chinese. We have a Chinese passport. They know that we are Uyghurs. They know that we do business with Kyrgyzstan. They know that we cross the border both ways all the time. So, that there's no problem.
Yep.
Try to explain that to the West, Danny. It's impossible.
Yeah, yeah, it is. When I was in Xinjiang, it's like that's basically what you see. You basically see an extension
Yeah,
of Central Asia inside of China, which is kind of
exactly.
an
Because
incredible
Xinjiang is
feature.
Central Asia, Danny. When you go there, yeah, it's fascinating. The first time that I went to Xinjiang, I went by bus and train. So I took a long train ride to get into Xinjiang. I was in Gansu province, so I crossed from
Yeah,
Gansu, the desert of Gansu,
beautiful. I've
essentially.
been there twice. It's beautiful. I mean,
Exactly,
that's the Silk Road. That's the
exactly. So
Silk
I
Road.
was doing this stretch of the Silk Road by train. You see the way the landscape changes. So geography always teaches everything, right? And geology teaches everything. And then you feel that you are, no, this doesn't look like China. This looks like Central Asia. I mean, there's no question about that. And when you arrive at Urumqi, the capital, you are in a big city in Central Asia.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
it, Huh? And because these regions, they were all interconnected for, wow, millennia, at least 2 millennia, if not more. If not more, exactly. Before they were separated into khanates, you name it, Mongol invasions, you name it. And they were all interacting. So, in fact, the Silk Road was a constant interaction of all these peoples in caravans going back and forth. And it's great to relieve that. Well, I am I am a freak, a Silk Road freak, nah? But but it's great to see live. For instance, I was looking at a map of the Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi came from a city near Turkestan, Otrar, 60 kilometers away. So when he was still young, he went on a pilgrimage because he wanted to learn from the great centers of Islamic thought. So he was on a caravan, and he went by caravan from what is today southern Kazakhstan to Damascus, Aleppo, Baghdad, and Cairo on camelback all the way.
Wow.
So it was normal at the time, absolutely normal. It was a trade route, but a knowledge route as well. Fascinating.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.